So recently, just for the sake of a new iPhone coming out and lots of people wondering what it looked like, we got the red iPhone 8 Plus. We sold our 8 Gray Plus just so we could feel good about it, but I then started realizing maybe I'll put my SIM card in this and kind of see what it's like to go back to the 8 Plus after the 10. And the results may shock you. This isn't a BuzzFeed headline. Let's talk about going back to an 8 Plus after using an iPhone 10. So basically, as soon as the iPhone 10 was available, it was my daily driver. I'd been using this phone as my primary phone with the exception of that S9 Plus for a little while, all the way up to the day that the 8 Plus was delivered. Of course, I thought the product red looked really cool, but I also thought, this is actually the only 2018 iPhone when you think about it. And while this would be a step backwards in a lot of ways from the iPhone 10, I surprisingly found myself liking a couple things. In fact, I've been using this as my daily driver for a while, and I'm even not really missing the 10 too much. But first of all, let's just get out in the open what things I miss having. The bezel-less display is really cool, and I prefer it on the 10. Being able to hold a phone that is almost entirely display on the front is really neat, and going back to this is classic, but yeah, definitely feels a bit more aged. I liked the notch on the iPhone 10, contrary to a lot of controversy, just because it made the top of my iPhone 10 really minimal. It did not have a bunch of information up there. Apps can kind of look more cluttered when you have all those tiny widgets at the top, and this kind of shrunk that down. Like, per se, if you're having a personal hotspot connection and it doesn't put an awkward blue bar at the top, it just puts a blue highlight around the time. Or if you're screen recording, whereas this puts a giant red bar at the top, this just obviously feels older because it is an older design, whereas the 10 definitely feels like the future. The 10's gesture controls are far better. I prefer having gestures as in switching between apps just from the home bar at the bottom than having a home button back on the 8 Plus. And of course, as many of you know, I have a skin disease known as psoriasis, which means that the Touch ID sensor on the 8 Plus is not very reliable. Another reason I really like Face ID. Of course, you guys know the rest. The contrast ratio on here is good. The dual camera is better. But let's start talking about some things I liked and I found out I missed about the product red iPhone 8 Plus. For one, the first thing I noticed was watching YouTube videos, I no longer had to make a decision. A common issue I ran into with the iPhone 10 was that every time I started watching a YouTube video, I had to make a choice. You have the option of zooming in the video and embracing the notch or just leaving it zoomed out the way it is by default. This can kind of be a difficult discussion because if you leave it default the way it is and there's no notch kind of popping in on your content, then you kind of have the old traditional style black bars on the side, which some people aren't as into, and it starts making your 10 look more like an 8. And then it's like, well, I got this bezel-less display, why not use it? So how much is the notch cutting into? Maybe it's not cutting into as much. With the 8 Plus, because of its more rectangular display that is LCD, you don't have to make that decision. As soon as you're watching a YouTube video, it's using every pixel. You don't zoom in, you don't decide which side the notch is on. So in that way, I think the 8 Plus is actually a lot nicer. The next big thing I found myself realizing I really liked about my 8 Plus was I prefer having larger phones. And while technically the iPhone 10 has a larger OLED display, because the angle of it is a lot more vertical than the 8 Plus, the 8 Plus still kind of feels like it has a wider, larger display. And that's because it does have a wider display. More content can be displayed because it retains its 16:9 ratio, even though it is a slightly smaller 5.5-inch display. Yes, this is 5.8, but that diagonal line that's measuring the display, that's more tilted like this. Now, I miss having Face ID, of course, but using the Touch ID sensor basically means I have to re-register my fingerprint 3 to 4 times a day, which is not ideal, but believe me, I'm not saying the 8 Plus is the better phone here. Today's video, I just want to talk about what surprising things I found liking about this phone opposed to this one. Obviously, I prefer gestures, I prefer Face ID, and once we can get this type of phone to work on a form factor of this size, I'm totally down for it, and it sounds like that's what's happening later this year. So the next thing I found myself really liking about going backwards to the iPhone 8 Plus was that I was no longer worrying about OLED burn-in. Yes, I'm aware that LCD displays can also have burn-in, but significantly less common than an OLED display. And I'm even aware that the iPhone 10 needs a lot of things to go wrong for OLED burn-in to officially start, between having the brightness turned all the way up and having the display on for long periods of time. I understand OLED burn-in is a rare thing, but just knowing that it's possible kind of bothers me. And what's nice about having the LCD display is I know that it is so difficult to get to a point where this actually starts causing burn-in. As in, I'm not really afraid to have this set to never auto-lock, because LCD displays, while they don't bend and allow for really cool bezel-less designs like this, they also aren't as fragile, so the display doesn't burn in as much, and you can pretty much leave this at a fairly high brightness brightness all night long, even sleep through it, and you'll wake up and have nothing to worry about. With the iPhone 10, you might want to be a little careful about that. Other thing I found myself liking about 8 Plus in terms of design, opposed from just the really cool product red color. In fact, if a 10 came in red, that would be dope. The camera bump is a lot less noticeable. When you're looking at an iPhone 10, the camera bump on the back, it's very rigid, it's very sharp. It's like a 90-degree cut right up out of the glass on the iPhone 10. Whereas on the 8 Plus, it's much more slanted, even though it is aluminum. And if you've been watching my vlogs over on Tailosive Talks, you know that my 8 Plus sat on a very diagonal Qi charger and somehow was able to slip off and collect a small dent on the aluminum. We were able to replace it, luckily, but I will acknowledge that if that happened with the iPhone 10, we probably wouldn't have gotten that dent in the phone, because stainless steel is a lot tougher of a material than this aluminum, which when it drops on like a bed frame or on something hard, it's probably much more likely to show signs of wear. So overall, in conclusion, I'm not trying to say that 8 Plus is a better phone. I just thought that in my experience of switching to this phone as my daily driver, I was kind of surprised with the amount of things I liked about that. I'm not really a fan of testing Android phones. Usually every time I put my SIM card in an Android phone and I stop using my iPhone, I just feel so limited because it can't do all the things my iPhone can, and it can't do all the things I'm used to my phone doing. But you can change your skin launchers and arrange your apps the way you want them to. Great, okay. I guess I'm just not as into that. But regardless, no denying the 10 is a better phone overall, but I definitely am starting to notice that this display, while beautiful and awesome, could definitely use a larger tier option. And I'm really excited to see later this year an iPhone 10 at this size. With the premium feel, the stainless steel build, the Face ID sensors, the gesture control, bringing that all up to a form factor of about this size, that's gonna be a really sweet phone to try out. So it's probably safe to assume a lot of you are watching this video on an iPhone 8 Plus. What do you like about your 8 Plus, and why aren't you interested in the 10? Didn't even mention that, 8 Plus is cheaper. What are your preferred features of the iPhone 8 Plus? Let me know in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.